Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Goodwin with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. Welcome to this week's History is Lunch program, which is sponsored by the John and Lucy Shackelford Charitable Fund of the Community Foundation for Mississippi. We're in our home, the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium in the Museum of Mississippi History and Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, and if you have not already done so, please silence your phones. This Saturday, February 12th, the Eudora Welty House and Garden will have an Arbor Day program from noon to 4 p.m. The Mississippi Forestry Commission will be giving away a selection of native trees, and there'll be scavenger hunts and name games interpreting significant trees in the Welty Garden. You can find more information on the MDH website or the Welty House Facebook page, but we hope we'll see you there. And remember to mark your calendars for February 24th, when we'll have the premiere of the new Mississippi Department of Archives and History film, The Defenders, here in this space. The movie trailer has just been released this week, and so we'll view it right now.
The movement involved some great and courageous people. Aaron Henry, Fannie Lou Hamer, so many people who every day took their lives in their hands to make Mississippi a better place. But they had to have lawyers likewise.
The changing of a society is a process that's glacial. Whether we like it or not, changing people's minds is an enormous undertaking.
Mississippi. It was the worst of the closed society.
There were so many things going on in Mississippi that were bad. If you could have seen the way black people were treated, it was just horrendous.
Our society is one based on the rule of law. That's how it's done in America. Lawyers were a helping role and a necessary role.
The primary responsibility of the national government was to protect fundamental rights, the rights of freedom and equality of the black people. And the national government wasn't moving.
Lawyers put real lives on the line.
I remember he was handling one case. He had received a telephone call saying, if you show up for court, we will kill you.
We must come to grips with the fact that while we are engaged in a battle to get an ultimate goal, it will take generations to do it.
You can find details on that on the department's website and social media pages, but hope we'll see you here on the 24th for that. And then I hope we'll see you next week when David Taylor, Holly Foster, and Eric Platt will be our History is Lunch speakers. They'll discuss their chapter in the new University Press of Mississippi book, Persistence Through Peril, Episodes of College Life and Academic Endurance in the Civil War South. Their article is titled, Mississippi College and the Mississippi College Rifles, A Campus at War and Death on the Battlefield. Today, we are delighted to welcome Talamieka Brice and Kiese Laymon to present Duck Hill Lynchings, National and Local History. We'll screen a clip from the film A Mother's Journey, written and directed by Brice with Laymon as the executive producer, then hear from Brice and Laymon in conversation after that. Talamieka Brice is an award-winning artist, photographer, and visual storyteller. She earned her BA in graphic design from Jackson State University. Talamieka and her husband Charles own Brice Media, which has worked with such organizations as the USA Olympic Fencing Team and Parents for Public Schools. In 2018, they submitted the winning design for a mural at the newly renamed Barack H. Obama Magnet School in Jackson. A Mother's Journey is Brice's first film. Jackson native Kiese Laymon is the author of the novel Long Division, the collection of essays How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America, and the memoir Heavy, which won the 2019 Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Nonfiction. The audiobook read by the author was named the Audible 2018 Audiobook of the Year. Laymon is the recipient of a 2020-21 Radcliffe Fellowship at Harvard. He earned his BA from Oberlin College and his MFA from Indiana University. Laymon is the founder of the Catherine Coleman Literary Arts and Justice Initiative, a program aimed at getting Mississippi kids and their parents more comfortable reading, writing, revising, and sharing. Help me welcome Talamieka Brice.
Does this work here? Oh, I didn't even have to walk all the way across here. I want to thank you guys so much for being here today. Thank you for showing up in the middle of a pandemic to come out and partake in some art, particularly my art and Kiese's art. It's really an honor to be at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, the newly minted Civil Rights Museum, especially considering that I'm originally from Montgomery County, which has Duck Hill, Kilmichael, and Winona as a part. And I joked when I was in college that usually you could find more people in a Walmart parking lot at any given point in time than lived in Kilmichael, Mississippi. Unfortunately, our population is still declining. There's lots of work to be done there, but there's also lots of fertile ground and rich soil and stories. So I'm very honored that it is my birthplace. It is the soil in which I was nurtured and grown, and it is the place where I learned the art of dynamic storytelling. And one of the stories that we will touch on in this film is when I was a child, my grandmother would tell me about hearing these men crying in the woods. And as a little kid, I couldn't understand why she couldn't just go and free them. And I was angry, so angry at her. And then when I became pregnant with my own child, and it's a son, and I had to realize that a lot of times, if we don't confront the things that we're carrying, we will pass that load on to our children. So it is through art and storytelling, and thankfully, I've met one of Mississippi's greatest storytellers, Kiese Laymon, and he was one that really saw the project, saw the art that was being put out, and sold into it by financing a lot of it. And that's really been a huge help to have someone of such great importance and quality say, I believe in your story enough to fund it. So thank you so much, Kiese, and thank you guys for being here. And it's a lot of little steps that led us all to this place and this stage, and I'm so grateful for you. So to set up this clip, part of the journey, part of it where you begin is that, you have to go back. You have to go to the places before. You got to look at where you got your face, your eyes, your nose, your lips, the generation from all of that. And with finding that out, it took me back home. It took me back to my grandmother's story, and it took me back to the lynching of Bootjack and Red, which this clip will refer to.
Is it tragedy or triumph that the breath swallowed in grave was witnessed by those you love, opposed to those that hated you? Too many Black Americans were bound and shackled by the hands of white supremacy, made into monsters to justify their history of slavery, burned at altars, sacrifices to an unholy God that demanded their lives. White hands stained with the blood of brown humans, tainting the mirage of a just and equal America. Their existence reduced to black and white photos and headlines. We've plowed the fields, harvested the crops, all the while looking for our own flowers. When your heart is stilled and you're planted in earth's womb, your deeds sprout forth across generations. Therefore, plant well. I saw his face, and in it, those I loved stared back at me. My son, my husband, my brothers. I saw his face, mouth open, eyes closed, face tilted to the heavens, rope around his neck in a fatal embrace. I saw his face, and it reminded me of the stories my grandmother told of Bootjack McDaniels, who was tortured and lynched yards from her doorstep. She spoke of his screams mixed with the laughter of white mobs that pierced the night sky, and how no black person moved in fear of joining that symphony. This story is not old. This face is new, but it is the narrative of America. It stands rooted in the soil and soul of the South. And this lyric is about Mississippi. Roosevelt Townes and Robert McDaniels, two black men, were lynched on April 13, 1937 in Duck Hill, Mississippi by a white mob after being labeled as the murderers of a white storekeeper. They had only been legally accused of the crime a few minutes before they were kidnapped from the courthouse, chained to trees, and tortured with a blowtorch. Following the torture, McDaniels was shot to death and Townes was burned alive. Pictures taken prior to Townes being lit on fire were the first lynching photographs to be published by the national press. They were reprinted in Time magazine and Life magazine, and then in national newspapers. Internationally, German newspapers publicized the murders to support Nazi government propaganda, contrasting the violence of the lynchings to its treatment of the Jewish population. There was an anti-lynching bill also introduced in the House of Representatives that ultimately failed. In dissent, one lawmaker stated, "We shall, at all costs, preserve the white supremacy of America."
We didn't shoot him. You did. They killed him. And that wasn't right. So he's the guy.
I had to go there. I had to lay eyes on it. I had to confront the shadows that haunted my childhood. If I was going to move forward into my destiny, if If I was going to fully be, I had to embrace my history. You can't paint a good portrait without shadows. The light needs the darkness. To help paint a clearer picture of what happened that night, I enlisted the help of a local historian and activist, Al White. This place, was it mixed back then, or was it primarily African American?
It was primarily mixed, you know. I can recall stories of with my uncle and the community, you know, working together, sharing things together, playing together. So they had here in the rural, they had a relationship, right? In terms of a mixed relationship. I understand the store owner was, you know, very lenient in terms of credit with African Americans. So I think it was a pretty good working relationship, given the standards at that time in terms of, you know, the color barrier, separation, that kind of thing.
So what happened at the store? What's that part of the story?
Well, from what I was told, that it was pretty much like, I've heard several different versions, but I heard that it was pretty much a robbery in terms of what got the crowd after those gentlemen to want to lynch them. And so I understand that the store owner was a, you know, very kind and friendly person, but from what I'm told, that's what happened. It was pretty much a robbery.
So they accused it was Bootjack.
The nicknames were Bootjack and Red. Roosevelt.
Yeah.
Right.
And with the thing that was in Life magazine, so the story goes that they were this was the catalyst. This particular lynching was the catalyst that led to the anti-lynching law.
Correct.
Could you expound a little bit, because you said a little bit about camera, like what was going on in Germany as opposed to what was going on in America at the time?
Sure. In the documentary by Henry Hampton that he did was called The Great Depression, and he focused on the anti-lynching period where there was legislation going on in Washington, D.C., and the boll weavers from the South were saying they didn't need that kind of legislation, that lynching was not happening, and all of a sudden, this incident occurred here in Montgomery County. And in his documentary, the photo that he used came out of a German newspaper, and that was being highlighted by, you know, the Germans in terms of the United States talking about their issues with the Jews, the things that he was doing, right? And so they wanted to highlight what America was doing in terms of the treatment of African Americans here in this country. And so that's what got this particular story in the international spotlight.
And there we stood in that unholy place, that sanctuary, that sacred ground, only yards from where their cries exited their bodies, pierced the night sky, and echoes across generations, from my grandmother to myself to George Floyd's murder that was going viral in that very moment. I want to say to the ground, do you remember? To the trees, are you rooted in their blood? Are your leaves the blossom of injustice? Do their screams cradle your branches? Just yards from the scene, we visited the store where the owner, George Wyndham, was fatally shot. A crime left unsolved and paid in black blood. What is a black life worth? Is it 3/5 of a white one? Does it depreciate in value when gender and sexuality, or factors? Is it worthy to breathe free air without the stench of inequality? Since we stepped off auction blocks, America has consistently underestimated our value.
Oh, I think I played that one.
We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities, whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place? Who among us would then be content with the counsels of patience and delay? 100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. They are not yet freed from the bonds of injustice. They are not yet freed from social and economic oppression. And this nation, for all its hopes and all its boasts, will not be fully free until all its citizens are free.
There's always a weight to be added to the histories we learn about this country. The tales are authored by men whose stories were the loudest and bloodiest.
I think we're getting everything set up. I want to thank you guys again. Hey, Key.
Hey, what's up, Mika? How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I want
Are
to
we-
thank. Yeah, we're on. Can you see?
Yeah. I can see the screen. I can see the bottom of the screen, but I don't need to see myself. But every time I see this, I've seen it and felt it so many times. Is it okay if we start talking?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Every time I see this, I feel another strand that I didn't feel the first time. This time, I wonder if it's okay if we start talking about where we are contemporarily in terms of Mississippi politics. So it feels to me like we're at this place where, on one hand, we've got folks in our state wanting to ban critical race theory without knowing what critical race theory actually is. And on the other hand, we have folks sometimes telling us as Black creatives that we should not make art out of the traumatic parts of our past. And I'm wondering how you negotiate that tension of calling home a place that is literally trying to make it illegal to teach something called critical race theory. And on the other hand, we deal with folk of all races, of all genders, of all spaces, telling us that Black quote unquote trauma or the Black trauma of our very complicated lives is something we should not explore. You negotiate it and you weave it so well, but can you talk about how and if there is any tension in between those for you?
Initially, I want to say that this was me showing you this clip was the first one where you were like, okay, I'm in. So thank you for that. I think with all of it, as being a creative, we all have these stories, these gifts, these things, these weights in more than one way that we carry. And it's like we can't breathe until we get them out. So honestly, like, yeah, I know we've talked about this before, but I honestly didn't care. It's like I gotta get this out. And another thing that my journey, my childhood, my blackness has taught me is about mortality. You know, at some point in time, we all got to check out of here. And being an artist, when I was young, I fell in love with William Shakespeare. And his sonnet 18, at the end it says, so long as man can breathe and eyes can see, so long lives this and this gives life to thee. So it's the left behind pieces of any civilization that tells the story of the people that lived there. You know, when archaeologists are doing excavations, they're looking at the pottery, they're looking at the written word. So it's our responsibilities at this point in time to tell the stories. And you even know, I think Zora Neale Hurston, I may be miscategorizing, like, but if you don't speak your pain, people will continue to kill you and then say that you liked it. So I felt like I had to get that out. And we're at a place in our country where truth is paramount. It's really time to get to the truth of who we are and who we were founded off of and to move forward, because we're planting trees that we may never sit in the shade of. And with my children coming forth, I want them to know their truth. So I felt like it was paramount to use the tools that I have to tell the story the best that I could.
And you know, one of the things that drew me so much to your work was the incredible revelation. And I hope it's okay for me to say this. I didn't ask you if I could say this, but the incredible revelation that writing, right, like prose writing, was not something that you felt exceptionally confident in, right? And so when I read sentences like, and I heard sentences like, we plowed the fields, tended to the crops while looking for our own flowers. Yeah, I mean, is there a sentence that encapsulates our experience more? I don't know, but we plowed the fields and then, tended to the crops while looking for our own flowers. And I wonder if you can talk about how important the last part of that sentence is, like while looking for our own flowers. Because to me, this film is, among other things, the manifestation of you finding and looking for those flowers while accepting the plowed fields and the tended crops. Can we talk about the flowering? Because you use the words plant well. So it seems like it to be so much about growth and fertile land. And I think that's important because we come from Mississippi and folks often want to give us that, I think we both probably have a love for Tupac.
Right.
But Tupac said that I just could never vibe with was that rose that grows out of concrete. You know what I mean? I understand what Tupac meant, but we who come from Mississippi, I don't care where we are as Black folk, we come from some fertile land and land tended to by folk who were looking for flowers. Can we talk about that part for a second?
Well, I think it really hits a lot on what you said about a lot of us aren't too removed from our people being sharecroppers, so we've always been tending to the land. And in that being attentive to the land, our hands, our fruit, our labor was able to feed our children, even though it may not have been as much as was needed. So we've got to find the beauty in that. Even though folks were still hungry, they were still making art. It's still done today. They were still making blues, they were still painting. They were still dancing. And those are our flowers. Those are our leave behind. Those are our seeds that we plant. And then when you plant those, other folks come along and take it, and then they use it, and then it's something else even more beautiful. So that just excites me. And even the life cycle of a seed, it's, even though it's dark and it looks like it could be a funeral, you're not buried, you're planted. Yes. I feel like that's part of who we are. It's part of our DNA. Like, we're planted. And then when you get out of that, when you break free of that soil, then you sprout and you grow and you shine. And then through that shining and through that being, you inspire others. And those are your seeds. And through their deeds, we all live on.
One of the things that I think you do better than most, and definitely better than me in the art that I'm creating, is that I'm not gonna say you use humor as much as you use the comic to sort of get us into situations that we might have to decide, is this funny or not? I always tell you, when you're talking to your mother and your mother's just like matter of fact about that, like I laugh in a way because of its familiarity. But this time, it was the first time that I really thought about the way you also capture the way laughter and screams contributed to our humiliation and many times our terror. And I wonder if you can talk about the juxtaposition of the need for laughter to keep us bountiful, to keep us alive, but also the insidious way that often our people were laughed at while being terrorized. It's like the laugh sometimes, it to me can be more humiliating than the actual screams. And I just wanted to get your voice in on that a bit.
Well, one of my favorite people to work with is Rita Brent, a local comic here. And she does a really great job of storytelling throughout different parts that are painful. And that's something that I could really vibe with. Though, I mean, a lot of stuff happens sometimes. You got to find the joy in it. I think those are our flowers. And even with the whole part about, the laughter of I can't imagine, I don't ever want to be there, of hearing the laughter of your tormentors as you're taking your final breath. But I think by having those two together, by connecting those emotions, then we remind others of our emotions and our feelings and how to push through them, And I think with that, it kind of gets to that whole humanity that we're capable of much more, than what we're doing. And hopefully through the work, pushing us to do more to create more laughter and less screams.
Ooh. I didn't even tell you. I did not tell you I was going to ask you that question, but you rocked that, Joy. Thank you. You rocked that. But also, family, I want to think for a second also about the importance of like futurism, because so much of what you do visually feels futuristic. The first time you probably remember this. The first time I watched this, I was like, did they use drones? Like, how did you get that shot? And there were so many times when there was a conversation with I forgot the fellow's name who's an oral historian. What's the fellow's name?
Al White.
Yeah, Al White. Like and like just the move to allow your questions to stay in that felt like such a sort of courageous move as opposed to just cutting it up and having him talk. So I feel like you make these moves that I often associate with like futurity, while mining a history. And you're also someone like who is, you seem very attuned to the way technology and construction work. But what I'm saying is it feels like you are straddling that line that Black folk have always had to straddle in Mississippi, though we're often seen as, we're seen as slow and we're seen as the last by so many people outside of the state. We know that we know within ourselves that like, I don't know if there are any more agile straddlers of the past and the future than us. But I wonder if you can talk about the importance of like the future and futurism in a work that appears to be so much about the past.
Well, a lot of this, when you talk about, that was drone work. And there are some things that I do well, and there are some things that others do better. And the drone work was by Rory Doyle. And if anybody knows Rory's like an amazing photographer. He was initially a journalist. And he does all this work for like the New York Times and the Guardian. And what drew me to Rory was his work. Like before I even knew who he was, I was looking for a photographer in the Delta and someone suggested Rory. So I was looking at his work because he has this whole series on Black cowboys. And when I saw it, as someone who photographs people, and especially as a Black person, you could tell a bit how the photographer felt when he photographed someone, how they felt. And I saw a humanness, a kindness with the images that Rory shot, a tenderness, and that really drew me in. So it took a while because on his profile picture on Facebook, it has his wife. So actually I thought it was his wife before it was him. But I wanted that type of tenderness to shine through. And I was very specific about the people that I work with. Michael Williams also was one of the heads when it came to camera work. Michael is an openly gay man. And the way there is a vulnerability to that and a seeing outside of the other and a compassion that I felt were really instrumental to the storytelling. So when you look at futurism and you look at moving forward, it's us working together to finding those parts and those pieces and that human ability between us all to be able to tell a good story.
I love it. I love it. Do you think we have time for one more?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So the other thing I want to ask, and it's sort of connected to this, since we've met and become friends, a lot of our time is spent joking, making each other laugh online about stuff and talking about art. But something that I think that neither of us have found ways to laugh through, maybe thankfully, is the current assault on women's reproductive rights. And the ultra uber current attack on Joe Biden's potentially naming a black woman as a Supreme Court justice. When you think about the film you created, how do you think? Because I have lots of ways that I could answer this question if I were you. But how do you think that this film speaks to both of those realities, right? Like you are literally in ground zero of the assault on women's reproductive rights. And we also, given what one of our senators just said, are again in the news because, I think the worst of white folks are showing their ass as the worst of white folks, saying that how dare Joe Biden make this affirmative action quota higher. So I'm wondering how you feel and think that your film, and you don't have the responsibility to speak to that directly, but I feel like the film actually does. And I wonder if you felt the same way.
A bit. There are other projects that I'm working on that will go more in depth. But when you go back to the quote at the end of, the sand illustration, where the senator says, "We shall at all costs preserve the white supremacy of America." That follows under the all cost. Because the thing of it is, if we really want, Mississippi, if we really wanted to do something about the unborn, when it comes to the maternal rate here, we are like a third world country. We did not accept Medicaid dollars. That's something that has closed our rural communities. We recently had a mother last year who lost her child because she couldn't get to a hospital on time because all the hospitals were closed. So, and I think with all of that, it's if abortion is outlawed, people with the means who are predominantly white will still find a way to have access. If we really want to do more work within the community, there are things we could do besides closing clinics. For instance, we can't even teach sex education in the state of Mississippi. And I thought it was just like, you have to sign up for it. It's not a core curriculum. And I thought it was just my generation, but I recently had interactions with someone who was graduating high school and they hadn't had any sex education. So, there are ways that you can decrease the numbers of abortion that are not related to closing clinics. And until we get to who benefits from the closed clinics, we will still have these issues. Who benefits from the denied rights? And I think it also, the movie will screen in its entirety at Smith Robertson Saturday. And it addresses a lot of different aspects that aren't talked about in this little clip. But one of the things that I feel like that we are here all at this point in time on this place, the one thing connecting us all is we have, beyond it all, is we have heartbeats. That's one of the first things that lets you know that, from a parental standpoint, when the doctor's checking you as a mom, they want to check the baby's heartbeat. They want to make sure that the heart is beating right, And it's through those heartbeats, through us sitting there, through this collection community of all of us here of beating hearts, is where we have to open our ears and listen to the stories of people that may not look, love, or worship like we do. Because it is our responsibility to make sure that their hearts can beat in a way that affords them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So once you get to that point of knowing that at some point in time you run out of heartbeats, and you got to do some good work while you're here. And for the people that are in positions of power, there's got to be something missing, something lacking that makes it feel like these grab of rights, this grab of this grab of that will fill that hole in their heart. And that's what we really have to get to as a community. A friend of mine once said, we won civil rights to an extent, but they're still under attack. But we won the law, but we didn't win the hearts. And the key is the hearts.
I love that. Thank you so much for this, and thank you for giving me opportunity to be in public conversation with you again, fam. Like I learned so much from your art, and I learned so much from the way you answer your questions. And you just make me feel like so happy to be from Jackson. I ain't gonna lie to you.
The feeling is mutual. The feeling is mutual.
Thank you.
We still got a few more minutes before we open up for questions.
Yeah, if anybody has questions, we can go to that now. Do you want to?
Did you have
questions for either Kiese or Talamieka? You can ask them. Just raise your hand, and I'll bring the mic to you. All right.
Hi, Talamieka. This is Brenda Willis on the Jackson Advocate. I was taking notes, and when you were talking about your art and how our art is our culture more so, and our music is being used nowadays. You watch television and you see commercials that are put on by big corporations, and they're using Motown music behind everything to sell dog food and perfume and cat litter and whatever. And I think that then, degrades our art and what it took to bring Motown music into mainstream, and the people who created that music, that there's a lot of that when we are still fighting for our place in boardrooms of those same companies that are putting on these advertisements using our music. Give me your thoughts about that.
Well, I think one of those things, and I'll speak briefly and then throw it to Key, is that there's most of the music, 90%, if not all music, really originated from Black culture. And I think by just doing what you did, by acknowledging that and then pushing back on that narrative, is one of the ways that we can continue to talk about our stories. I know it's really, one of the things that I found really interesting is, especially for the folks that's like in the middle, is learning our own stories outside of critical race theory, or whatever it is that they're teaching in classrooms, is having access to those around you with the lived experiences. I know a lot of people in this room lived through Brown versus Board of Education. It's being able to talk to folks about that and getting the true story of it. I feel like that's part of our pushback. What do you think, Key?
I wholly agree. And, I also think, historically, we know that it's so common for Black musical artists to not own their music, to not own their rights, to not own their masters. Hold on.
I think the echo.
I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There's a fire. There's a fire alarm about to happen in this hotel I'm in. So anyway, I just want to say that I agree with you But I do feel like there are times when we do own our music, we do own our likenesses. If you take, for example, what the King family is doing. And so sometimes I think we have to be a lot more judicious about when we use our art and our music and our likeness, like to sell and to move product. For example, when, a few years ago, they were using King to sell Big Macs, to
Right.
sell, McDonald's shakes and whatnot. I think, collectively, we need to make our voice known and heard, be like, this is your family, this is, this is your, you can do whatever you want, but this is how this makes us feel. And we don't necessarily think that this is a healthy thing for our community. They're going to go ahead and sell those Big Macs with Dr. King talking about, I had a dream of eating a Big Mac all they want to. But I think we sometimes need to push back a little bit.
I just want to say I really enjoyed the clip and the discussion. I'm very excited. I want to thank Daniel, my colleague at the Margaret Walker Center, for reminding me to come to this beautiful event. And I also was very moved by not just the imagery, but the words. The words are beautiful. I couldn't type fast enough all the beautiful metaphors in your work. But one that struck out was when you said you can't paint a good portrait without shadows. And I wanted to know, as an artist, scholar, activist, what is your process like for maintaining your authenticity?
Mainly my kids, because it doesn't matter how many, especially my daughter, it doesn't matter how many accolades you have. If you don't have her milk and purple blanket on time, it's a problem. So, so that keeps me humble, like Mama, where's the fish sticks? Like all of that keeps me humble more than anything. And knowing that, first of all, with all of it, I mean, can we just all have a round of applause for Kiese here on how awesome he is? Like, this amazing guy who's like so talented and so awesome still pours back into his community. Then, New York Times bestseller right here. How can you not be humble when you know that it's like, where's that old school, our mamas used to say, for the grace of God, there go I, that's one of the things that really keeps me grounded, is actually being present in moments. And my children and my family, even my adopted family, has taught me that.
Keese, this is Mary Crump, but I want to say thanks to both of you for such a wonderful production. But also, you talked about the flowers, and it sounded a lot like that it also can be used as a coping mechanism. Do you think, as far as with using the flowers at this day and time, as the way things are going, that flowers can still be used as a coping?
Absolutely. I know, like, I buy my mother flowers out of the blue daily. And then I remember Sunday mornings getting up, putting on the stockings and slips and listening to the old school gospel. And I can't think of that family, but they had that Give Me My Flowers While I Yet Live, that song. Yeah, they are a huge, huge coping mechanism. Anytime, the beauty of anything around you, just kind of lightens your day and reminds you that you're alive. That's what I love about flowers. Or even going out in the woods and hearing like the birds and everything creep and move. Like, those are little beings that have lives too. And you get to be there with them. And they serve their purpose. Like, you never hear, oh, I remember I was doing something once with I made a calendar with my dogs, and you never think about, like, dogs when they're puppies and they want to jump on the bed. Like, if they miss it, they're never like, I'm the worst dog ever because I didn't jump on the bed. Like, animals don't do that. They just keep trying, and there's so much we can learn from that. Just keep jumping on the bed, keep trying.
Can I say one thing to that too? Yeah. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I just want to say, I'm a writer, so sometimes I take metaphor too far. So if I do, please stop me, Mika. But Mary Crump, to me, is also an example of the importance of seeing sometimes our young people as flowers that deserve water, deserve fertilization, deserve sunshine. I grew up with Madra Crump, one of Mary Crump's daughters, and that was a special time for me. I don't know if you feel this way, Miss Crump, but it was a special time at Holy Family where we literally were a holy family. And one of the things one of the reasons I know I'm here is because though Mary Crump had her own children to tend to and tend with, like Mary Crump made sure that we all were watered. She made sure that we all felt sunshine. And I'm not trying to be sentimental or saccharine, but that also is what keeps children alive, especially in the face of public policy that doesn't want them to breathe. So I just want to say thank you, Ms. Crump, for coming, and also thank you for tending to so many of us when we were young and needed watering from different people other than our parents who were also doing the watering. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you both for this opportunity. Mr. Laymon, I need to speak to you about Ozzie Kambuli sometime. But I'd like to ask about, as a retired Jackson Public School teacher who's wishing to get back into the system, about this program with writing with our children. There's a voyeurism, though, in a way, about talking about our pain. It's when, it's like that family secret. It's like, you're a teacher and this child is just seething inside with a kept secret. And I can't get through at all because this child is in so much pain. But for me to open up the child, I've broken the family secrets. And it's almost like rape, and so how... I'm here because of the pain. Wow, it so spoke to my heart. Thank you. But can you speak to us about the program as a filmmaker? How do you get children to talk with respect so it isn't just voyeurism?
I actually think I don't work with as many children as Kiese does. I actually think that's a better question for him.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to to quote you earlier, I'm paraphrase, so that's not an exact quote. When Talamieka writes, "We plow the fields, tending to the crops while looking for our own flowers," I think as educators, we have to be as attuned to the pain that shapes the way our students move, think, and listen as we are to the joy that impacts the way they move, think, and listen. There's not one child in Mississippi and Jackson right now that is not bubbling with a kind of joy that often school teachers and educators neglect. And so one way you don't fetishize the trauma is you don't act as if the trauma exists alone. Do you know what I mean? As a young person coming up in formally educated spaces, I was not encouraged to talk about the things that brought me the most joy. As a matter of fact, the things that brought me the most joy, I was encouraged to keep outside of the classroom. So that meant we could whisper. We could whisper to each other about the things that brought us the most joy. We could talk about them out loud during recess, but in those classrooms, there wasn't space made for us to talk about joy. And I don't believe you are talking about pain if you're not talking about the joys that some sort of collects around that pain. So I would as an educator, I'm not trying to give anybody advice. I'm saying as an educator, we have to make the equal space, I think even more space for our kids to talk about what actually brings them joy and ask them, is there a difference between happiness, joy, and pleasure? Because ultimately, those three things need to be explored just as much as trauma, but none of them have any integrity unless they're explored together. That's my opinion.
Thank you both so much for amazing work. Talamieka, you're now a documentary filmmaker, and you've won awards for this documentary. And you could roll with those labels, and yet you don't. Every time I hear you talk about this film, you center your role as a visual storyteller, and you center that this film is a work of art. And so I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about why you're doing that. Like, why make sure to call it a work of art?
Because that's the only way I know to be. Is film became a tool. Like the writing, Key and I go back and forth all the time, and it's gotten to the point where Kiese try to make a habit, because I talk to him like fam. We talk to each other like fam. But Kiese and I make a point all the time. Like, my degree is in art, and filmmaking has just become a tool to express that art. So art is like my basis, even with the writing. When I grew up, like, writing is what made me feel seen. And that's why I fell in love with Shakespeare. Nobody writes pain like Shakespeare. That's why initially I thought he was a black woman. And that's why I really identified with him. But it's still a form of art. Like, all of it is art, even with the photography. And, you know, you'll see in the film on the full film, us painting the Obama mural and all the heat. Like, that's the center of knowing your center and your core. And my center and core is art.
Thank you both very much for that presentation. The art came through to me, especially in the juxtaposition of two images. One of them, of course, that horrific image of the lynched men in that field tied to those trees. But the other was an image from today where the white-dominated store, which was the center of kind of wealth creation on that plantation, in ruins today. And that the older images of that store, it was a thriving place with stock and people moving around and getting to know each other. And he had a reputation for being humane. And it just struck me that it's no coincidence that the state that treated its black and brown brothers and sisters the way the state of Mississippi did, the worst of any of the 50 states in the Union. And the truth of today that Mississippi is last in every economic indicator, every health indicator, and so on, that the lynching of its own people has led Mississippi down this path to not just mediocrity, but to tragedy of immense proportions. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you for being here.
I hate it. We have come really to the top of the hour, but there are lots of questions in the live stream, and the main one that gets repeated over and over again is, where can we see this film?
Smith Robertson Museum this Saturday at 12 o'clock. 11, from 11 to 1. And there will be a live stream as well. If you follow my social media, I'll be posting the links there so you can sign up, because there's limited seating due to COVID.
Yeah. Well, that's great.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, man.
You know, we are sadly 50th in most economic indicators and a lot of things that we want to be number one in. But what I love about what Talamieka has done is that, like, it's just a constant reminder that as bad as we are at infant mortality, at healthcare for all, at all those economic indicators, we're number one when it comes to cultural workers. We are number one in this nation when it comes to the creation of art. And Talamieka, to me, is a prodigious example of how one can make wonder out of hard situations, but we do not want to give our next generation any more hard situations to make art out of. So I just want to say that before we get up out of here.
Thank you all for being here today. Remember to catch the film at Smith Robertson this weekend. We hope that we'll see you back here for History is Lunch next Wednesday. But for now, help me thank Talamieka Brice and Kiese Laymon for this program today.
All right.